The South China Sea is considered the second busiest shipping lane in the world after the Mediterranean Sea, through which around 150 to 200 vessels navigate per day. Therefore, maintaining peace and stability and ensuring freedom, security and safety of navigation in the South China Sea has attracted the attention of the international community. The recent tensions in the South China Sea have raised concerns among countries both in and outside the region. The root of those tensions stems from an irrational claim in the South China Sea with a number of different names, including the 9-dash line, the cow tongue line, or the U-shaped line. The 9-dash line was drawn by a Chinese individual and first appeared on the map called Islands, location in the South Sea. The line is also called cow tongue because it resembles a cow's tongue licking down into the South China Sea. The 9-dash line was drawn arbitrarily and inconsistently without exact coordinates, changing from map to map. At first, the 9-dash line was depicted by 11 dashes. After 1953, 2 dashes in the Tonkin Gulf were erased, and thus there were only 9 dashes left on the map. No apparent reason has been given to explain the mysterious deletion of the 2 dashes. Recently, there appeared a 9-dash line with 10 dashes, including an additional dash near Taiwan, and neither was there an explanation for the addition of that 1 dash. It is even unclear as to whether the 9-dash line first appeared in 1947 or 1948. In other words, the line is just a delusive and vague stroke. Regarding the inconsistency of the 9-dash line depicted on maps, experts hold various opinions.
If you look at the U line, once again, or the $9 line, it started with 11 dashes, 2 disappeared in 1953, nobody knows exactly why, so the 2 dashes in the Gulf of Tonkin disappeared, and then if you look at today, some maps depict 10 dashes, with 1 more close to Taiwan, so you go from 11, you come to 9, and then it goes to 10, it means that there is apparently a contradiction as to the exact nature of the claim.
First, the line has to be assumed to be a Chinese claim. However, we believe that first and foremost, it has not yet constituted a claim in conformity with international law, which has to be expressed in a clear and transparent manner to the international community. China initially only based its claims on a vague map which so far has yet to be clarified, and the Chinese government has also never interpreted its claims. Therefore, it cannot constitute a claim in conformity with international law. Second, what are these claims based on? They are based on some reasoning of China which was criticized by researchers worldwide as contrary to the UNCLOS and particularly to one fundamental principle of the law of the sea. In particular, the land dominates the sea. This means that maritime claims shall be derived from land features. Although its 9-dash line is not drawn from any of those, China claims sovereignty over all islands, rocks and waters within this line. Hence, it's contrary to the principle that the land dominates the sea in the law of the sea, and thus seriously violates international law. Assessing the legality of this claim under contemporary international law at the time the 9-dash line was first officially introduced was not based on any legal grounds. According to the international law of the sea at the time, the majority of coastal states only claimed a maximum 3 nautical miles of the breadth of the territorial sea, and the Republic of China in the 1930s also assumed that the Chinese territorial sea only extended to 3 nautical miles. Chinese scholars themselves have objectively acknowledged it is open to question whether the authors of this line were sufficiently aware and knowledgeable of contemporary international law of the sea. The 9-dash line runs along and close to the coast of the countries surrounding the South China Sea, making up approximately 80% of the South China Sea and encroaching on the exclusive economic zones and continental shelves of other coastal states in the South China Sea. Pursuant to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, UNCLOS, Coastal states have the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of at least 200 nautical miles measured from the baseline. Looking at the map, it can be seen that the 9-dashed line encroaches upon 70% of the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of Vietnam, 80% of the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of the Philippines. In addition, it also infringes on the exclusive economic zones and the continental shelves of Malaysia, Brunei and Indonesia, seriously violating UNCLOS. Since the line appeared, China has never made any official statement or interpretation concerning the 9-dash line. On the 7th of May 2009, for the first time, China circulated the maps printing the 9-dash line, attached with the note verbale CML-17-2009 and CML-18-2009 to protest the submission of Vietnam and the joint submission of Vietnam on the limits of the extended continental shelf. However, China has not given any interpretation concerning the meaning of this irrational map. In the note verbale, China stated that the People's Republic of China has undisputable sovereignty over the islands in the South China Sea and the adjacent waters, and enjoys sovereign rights and jurisdiction over all relevant waters, as well as the seabed and subsoil. Mr. Robert Beckman, Associate Professor, Doctor of International Law from the National University of Singapore, said that nobody understands the so-called relevant waters and adjacent waters in China's view, simply because those terms are not interpreted in the language of UNCLOS. In other words, like the maps, the usage of this term by China to claim or even to assert its sovereignty is too ambiguous. This intentional ambiguity is more evident as China has no legal documentation mentioning the 9-dash line. On the contrary, the statement dated 4th of September 1958 on maritime zones of China even denied the existence of the 9-dash line. The statement says, "The breadth of the territorial sea of the People's Republic of China is 12 nautical miles. This provision applies to all the territories of the People's Republic of China, including the mainland and coastal islands, as well as Taiwan and adjacent islands, including Bangho, Dongsa, Taisa, Chungsa, Namsa Islands, and all other islands belonging to China that are separated from China's mainland by high seas." Immediately after the 9-dash line officially appeared before the international community on the 8th of May 2009, Vietnam sent a diplomatic note to the United Nations to protest. The diplomatic note clearly stated that the Paracel and Spratly Islands are parts of Vietnam's territory. Vietnam has undisputable sovereignty over those islands. China's claim to the islands and adjacent waters in the South China Sea, as illustrated on the map attached to the note verbale CML-18-2009 and CML-17-2009, has no legal, historical, nor practical basis. Therefore, it is invalid. On the 8th of July 2010, Indonesia sent an official diplomatic note to the UN to protest China's claims. Indonesia's note says, "The so-called 9-dash line attached to the note verbale CML-17-2009, dated 7th of May 2009, clearly lacks legal basis and contrasts with the provisions of UNCLOS 1982. On the 5th of April 2011, the Philippines sent a diplomatic note to the UN to protest the 9-dash line claim of China. The diplomatic note indicates that the adjacent waters and related waters used to justify the 9-dash line claim have no legal basis under international law, particularly under UNCLOS 1982.
The Philippines does not agree with the 9-dash line claim of indisputable sovereignty over an expansive area within the 9-dash line claim of China in the South China Sea. From our perspective, it is an expansive claim And that's why the Philippines was compelled to protest the 9-line claim. From our perspective, the 9-line claim is not consistent with international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which has been referred to as the Constitution of the Oceans, prescribe the various maritime entitlements that every coastal state should have. The 9-line claim of China is not among those maritime entitlements prescribed by UNCLOS. And therefore, because the 9-line claim has very negative implications on our own coastal entitlement, because it encroaches on a large segment of our maritime entitlement under UNCLOS, we have no other recourse but to protest it.
The Philippines has formally challenged China's 9-dotted line map at the United Nations, following in the footsteps of Indonesia, which did the same in 2010. Vietnam has rejected the legality of China's map and said that it cannot form the basis of the agreement on joint development. Singapore has called into question the legal basis of the map and called on the PRC to clarify its claims.
No country has ever supported the 9-line claim of China because it has absolutely no legal basis. Most countries have expressed their discontent towards this irrational claim. Some countries have directly or indirectly criticized the 9-line claim. At the Asian Regional Forum, ARF, in July 2010, the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton upheld the principle that the land dominates the sea. Maritime claims have to originate from land territory, indirectly refuting the maritime claims of China based on the 9-line. In 2012, at the U.S. Congress hearings on the ratifications of UNCLOS, Secretary Clinton once again directly criticized the 9-line claim by emphasizing that China's claims in the South China Sea exceed the limits set forth by the UNCLOS 1982. In meetings with Vietnamese leaders, Secretary Clinton has repeatedly affirmed her support of coastal states to exploit resources in the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf in accordance with international law. On the sidelines of the APEC summit in November 2011 in Hawaii, Secretary Clinton met Vietnamese President Truong Tan Sang and affirmed her support for Vietnam in enforcing sovereign rights and jurisdiction in its exclusive economic zones and continental shelf of 200 nautical miles. At a meeting with Prime Minister Nguyen Thanh Dung in Hanoi in July 2012, Secretary Clinton affirmed that the U.S. government strongly supported the rights of the coastal states in their exclusive economic zone and continental shelf in accordance with UNCLOS 1982. Japan also publicly protested the 9-line claim in the 2012 ASEAN Forum. European countries, India and Australia agree that the 9-line threatens the freedom, security and safety of navigation in the South China Sea.
And back to the South China Sea issue, still unclear that China has a right to claim almost all of the area of the South China Sea, so-called 9-line and so on, they said. And other coastal country of ASEAN, including the Vietnam, claimed that the Chinese decision.
Since China circulated the map drawing the 9-line at the United Nations, it has urgently implemented activities in the South China Sea to realize the 9-line, seriously violating the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zones and continental shelves of the coastal states surrounding the South China Sea. China has put a number of warships into operation in the South China Sea, conducted military exercises on a large scale, sent more law enforcement vessels, marine surveillance vessels and fishery patrols to the South China Sea. Chinese fishing boats, organized into several teams with tens of boats in each, with the support of fishery patrols, have illegally entered the exclusive economic zone or continental shelf of coastal states in the South China Sea to exploit seafood. In mid-2011, during only 2 weeks, China twice hindered and destroyed a cable belonging to a Vietnamese seismic survey vessel, while those vessels were operating normally, well within the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of Vietnam. On the 26th of May 2011, a Chinese marine surveillance vessel intentionally ran through the area where the cable of Bing Ming 2 vessel was set up and cut it off. The position where 3 Chinese marine surveillance vessels destroyed the facilities of Bing Ming 2 belonging to Vietnam Oil and Gas Group was at the coordinates of 12 degrees 48 minutes 25 seconds north and 111 degrees 26 minutes 48 seconds east, only approximately 120 nautical miles from Dai Lang Cape, Phu Yen Province, Vietnam. The position is located entirely within the exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, and thus is under the sovereign rights and jurisdiction of Vietnam. China's acts seriously violated UNCLOS 1982. Several days later, on the 9th of June 2011, Chinese fishing boats with the support of fishery patrols blatantly sabotaged cables of the French Viking II, rented by Petro-Vietnam Technical Services Corporation, PTSC, to explore oil and gas offshore Vũng Tàu City, Vietnam. When the Viking II was conducting 3D surveys within Vietnam's exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, the Chinese fishing boat number 62226 ran at high speed through the cable line of Viking II's stern and cut the cable with specialized equipment, causing Viking's operations to be terminated. After that, 2 Chinese fishery patrols, number 311 and 303, approached the site of the incident and rescued the boat number 62226. Vietnam is strongly opposed to this violating act of China. The representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam summoned the Chinese ambassador to hand over a diplomatic note. The spokesman of the Vietnam Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam released a statement of objections. We refute the statement of the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson on the 28th of May 2011. First and foremost, the area where Vietnam conducted exploration activities is entirely within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of Vietnam under UNCLOS 1982. This is absolutely not a disputed area, nor is it an area that China controls. The Chinese side is trying to mislead the public into believing that an undisputed area is a disputed one. Secondly, Vietnam always follows the common understanding of the leaders of the 2 countries that all disputes shall be resolved by peaceful means, and no act shall be taken to complicate the situation. However, it should be made clear that there is no common understanding that China has the right to impede Vietnam's activities in the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of Vietnam. This act of China is going against the common awareness of the 2 countries' leaders. On the 13th of June 2011, the U.S. Senate passed Resolution 217, proposed by U.S. Senator Jim Webb, chairman of the Subcommittee East Asia and the Pacific at the Senate, and Senator James Inhofe. Resolution 217 referred to the case of the cable cutting of Bing Ming 2 and Viking 2 vessels, as well as a number of other acts from China encroaching on the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, and condemned China's use of force in the South China Sea disputes. Even more seriously, on the 23rd of June 2012, China issued an invitation for international bids for 9 blocks in the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of Vietnam. Those 9 oil blocks that China National Offshore Oil Corporation, CNOOC, invited international contractors to bid for are of 160,129 square kilometers in total area. They are located deep within Vietnam's continental shelf and overlap the blocks from 128 to 132 and from 145 to 156, where Petro-Vietnam has been conducting petroleum operations with its partners. The western limit of the plot that China invited bids for is 76 nautical miles, over 140 kilometers, from Quang Ngai's coast, 60 nautical miles, about 110 kilometers, from Nha Trang's northern coast. The nearest point is only 57 nautical miles, 105 kilometers, from Nha Trang and Phan Thiet, and 30 nautical miles, 55 kilometers, from Phu Quoc Island. On the 27th of June, the representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam met the representatives of the Chinese embassy in Hanoi, handed a diplomatic note protesting against CNOOC's invitation for the bids on the 9 blocks located within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf of Vietnam. Vietnam's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson issued a statement of objections. At an international press briefing, Mr. Do Van Ho, Director General of Petro-Vietnam, stated that Petro-Vietnam asserts that the 9 oil blocks for which CNOOC's invitation of international bid are located in the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf of Vietnam, and this is not a disputed area. That was a wrongful and invalid act which is inconsistent with UNCLOS 1982 and international practice of oil and gas-related activities. This act seriously violates the sovereign rights, jurisdiction and national interests of Vietnam, complicating the situation and creating tension in the South China Sea. Petro-Vietnam strongly protests against and requests CNOOC to terminate the said wrong activity, to strictly follow the agreement on basic principles guiding settlement sea issues between Vietnam and China, and to respect international law, especially UNCLOS 1982 and the spirit of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, DOC. Petro-Vietnam suggests international oil companies refrain from bidding on the 9 oil blocks that CNOOC invited within the exclusive economic zone of Vietnam. At the second annual meeting on the South China Sea Maritime Security, held on the 27th and 28th of June 2012 by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, based in Washington, D.C., Senator Joe Lieberman, chairman of Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, voiced strong criticism of Chinese invitations for bids on the 9 blocks within the continental shelf of Vietnam. Senator Joe Lieberman said that the CNOOC's invitation of bids for oil and gas exploration and exploitation in the 9 blocks in the South China Sea is baseless and unprecedented. Those blocks are located within the Vietnam Exclusive Economic Zone, recognized by international law. Also at this workshop, a number of international scholars strongly criticized China's invitation for bids for the 9 blocks within the continental shelf of Vietnam. Professor Carlisle Thayer from the Australian Defence Force Academy confirmed that these blocks lie within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone of Vietnam. At an international workshop with the theme Tension Management in the South China Sea, held by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, US, in Washington, D.C. in June 2013, Mr. Gregory Poling, researcher in the CSIS, United States, observed, "I bring here the map of the 9 blocks which the CNOOC invited bids for in June last year, which Vietnam has protested against. The map proves that Vietnam has firm grounds to do so. Even if China owns the islands in the South China Sea, and these islands are entitled to the waters up to 200 nautical miles, there is no way that the blocks lie entirely within the area over which China can make claim. At the 5th International Workshop on the South China Sea, Cooperation for Security and Development in the Region, held in Hanoi in November 2013, international lawyers and researchers assessed the adverse impacts of the U-shaped line claim on the oil and gas activities of the coastal states in the South China Sea.
Well, you've seen the outcome was that nobody bid for the blocks. Here is again a situation which is weird because you have blocks which are within the 200 nautical miles from it's the economic exclusive zone of Vietnam, so it's under the sovereignty of Vietnam. And you have China coming in and asking for bids from international companies to explore and exploit it. It's like if I was trying to rent your house to a third party without having any rights. It's on the legal base, international law, UNCLOS and everything, all the applying regulations and laws. It's violating the rights of Vietnam. Okay. So that's why the companies, international companies, don't want to come because it's unstable and not even unclear. It's illegal.
As I've argued in some of the reports I've done, the 9-dash line goes beyond any conceivable maritime entitlement that China would get from its islands. So it leaves the Philippines and Vietnam in a position where, according to China, they can't even explore for oil a few miles off their coast. It's not about joint development in disputed waters. China wants to force joint development on every inch of the South China Sea. Especially in the case of the Vietnamese, I've heard Vietnamese officials tell me that essentially makes us a landlocked power. Nobody's going to accept that.
General Daniel Schaefer, former French military attaché to Thailand, Vietnam and China, observed that China is gradually realizing its ambition to impose the 9-dash line on other countries despite its lack of legal validity. In June 2012, China announced the establishment of the so-called Sancha City, including the Paracel and Spratly Islands of Vietnam and the Macclesfield Bank, with an area of waters of about 2 million kilometers squared, which is in fact the whole area within the 9-dash line. China has gradually reinforced the legislative and executive bodies, set up a Sancha-based command control center, built infrastructure and economic agencies there, etc. Those are the specific steps to realize the 9-dash line claim. Vietnam has issued a statement of objections. The Philippines also voiced its protest. The Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs spokesman said that although Manila does not claim sovereignty over the Paracel Islands, that Beijing plans to control both the Paracel and Spratly Islands under the so-called Sancha is unacceptable. On the 3rd of August 2012, the U.S. Department of State issued a statement protesting China's establishment of Sancha City and the militarization of Sancha. The U.S. Senate passed the Resolution 524, chaired by the Senator John Kerry, to criticize Chinese actions in the South China Sea, including the establishment of Sancha City. The decision of the Central Military Commission of the Communist Party of China to deploy troops to the South China Sea, over which Vietnam claims its sovereignty, is an unnecessarily provocative action. Along with that, the legislature election to govern all the offshore islands and waters over which China claims sovereignty in the South China Sea further elucidates the reason why many Asian countries are increasingly concerned about the expansion of China's baseless claims under international law, as well as the possibility that China tries to implement that statement through threats and coercion. In assessment of China's establishment of the so-called Sancha City, Mr. Jonathan London, Associate Professor from University of Hong Kong, said,
"The administrative boundaries of Sancha correspond with the so-called 9-dotted line, the cow's tongue. And like the cow's tongue, it's a completely illegitimate demarcation of territory and waters that has no basis in international law. and so it's similarly invalid and illegitimate.
The establishment of so-called Sansha City is part of a pattern of behavior by China in which it's trying to change, what we would say, change the facts on the sea. That is, it's to establish positions from which it cannot be removed. Actually, my colleague and I at the Stimson Center wrote a short article, after that establishment of the Sansha City, in which we titled it Sea of Absurdity. That is, the whole idea is absurd, that you can make a city out of a small island with no water and no real sustainability. So it's just part of an effort by China to say, not only do we claim most of the South China Sea, but that we occupy strategic points in that area. And in some cases, they're claiming the right to occupy and to call an island what is actually a submerged bank.
On the 27th of November 2012, the People's Council of Hainan Province, China, adopted the regulations for the management of coastal border security and public order in Hainan Province, providing that the competent authorities of China are allowed to handle, examine, control, arrest and chase foreign vessels and people operating in the waters over which China claims sovereignty in the South China Sea. This is the next step to reinforce the legal basis to control the South China Sea under the 9-dash line for the purpose of controlling the whole South China Sea. This action received strong responses from regional organizations and concerned countries. The EU, the ASEAN, the US and the Philippines requested that China clarify the regulation's scope of application. Along with the activities to realize the claim of the 9-dash line in the field, China has sought all ways to propagandize the 9-dash line claim, such as mapping the 9-dash tongue on goods, souvenirs and name cards of Chinese officials, attaching the 9-dash line map to websites and magazines. In particular, China printed the map drawing the 9-dash line onto the passports of Chinese citizens, causing discontent from the international community. The Vietnam Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman stressed that the 9-dash line map printed on passports of Chinese citizens has violated Vietnam's sovereignty over the two islands of Paracel and Spratly, as well as the sovereignty, sovereign rights and jurisdiction of Vietnam over the relevant waters in the South China Sea. The Philippines sent a note verbal and strongly protested against China's inclusion of the 9-dash line map in its passports. Indonesia also sent a diplomatic note of protest to the Chinese embassy in Jakarta to object to China's issuance of new passports printing the 9-dash line map. In an interview published in Jakarta Post dated 29th of November 2012, the Indonesian Foreign Minister Martin Natalegawa said that the new type of passport, which included the 9-dash line map covering disputed islands in the South China Sea, were cunning and counterproductive, only complicating the current tense disputes in the South China Sea. The U.S. Department of State spokesman expressed the concern that the 9-dash line map printed on the passports of China will cause tensions and concern among countries surrounding the South China Sea. The origin and the meaning of the 9-dash line are entirely ambiguous and so unclear that even Chinese scholars cannot give any consistent and reasonable explanations. Many Chinese scholars also disagree with the claim of the 9-dash line.
We're all asking, what is it? The Chinese, now going back to the pre-PRC era, have, shall we say, never really quite specified what it is. And this is conceded by Chinese lawyers.
In June 2012 in China, the Institute of Economic Research, Tianzi, and the electronic newspaper Sina.com held a workshop titled South China Sea Dispute, National Sovereignty and International Rules. At this workshop, Mr. Li Linghua from China's Center for Oceanic Information clearly stated, "From the past to present, there are absolutely no virtual land or sea borders in the world. The 9-dash line in the South China Sea is virtual. Our ancestors mapped out the 9-dash line without specific latitude, longitude, or legal basis." Mr. Zhang Zhuguang, the chairman of Academic Council Institute for Economic Research, Tianze, professor of China's Institute for Social Sciences, said that the 9-dash line has no legal basis. Our domestic jurists and Taiwanese colleagues also share such common understanding. It was only unilaterally declared by China. At the conference, several Chinese scholars called on China to strictly implement the UNCLOS 1982 and to respect the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of its neighboring countries. Mr. Li Linghua from China's Center for Oceanic Information said that when defining its sea borders, China needs to follow the spirit of the UNCLOS 1982 and cannot invoke the so-called historical factors. In my opinion, based on the law of the sea, people from the countries surrounding the South China Sea and the Chinese people are both entitled to a large maritime area of 200 nautical miles and enough maritime space to develop fisheries and exploit seabed resources. From the perspective of humanity, we need to have a comprehensive view. The scope of UNCLOS 1982 includes maritime delimitation and rearrangement so that each coastal state has 200 nautical miles, which is convenient for them to exploit, use and manage